Well, today we're in Isaiah 54, continuing this series that began in chapter 52 with the salvation of Israel being predicted, and then the means of that salvation through the suffering servant. And now we see in this section what I've called the vindication and heritage of Israel. We can also call it a celebration of salvation. We can talk about it in terms of the fruits of salvation. So this is the kind of the culmination of the vicarious suffering of the servant described in chapter 53. I've taken chapter 54 and divided it into two large sections. The first section goes from verses 1 through 10, which is a statement that the restoration and renewal of Israel is guaranteed, it's certain, verses 1 through 10. So restoration and renewal in the near term would be the return of Israel from the Babylonian exile. But as we go through the chapter, you'll see that, as with a lot of messianic prophecy, that what begins with a local situation soon expands into a global situation. So we see the global renewal of the earth, the global restoration. So it begins with a song. Sing, O barren one who did not bear, break forth into singing and cry aloud, you who have not been in labor. So it's looking at Israel as a kind of a barren wife. They've been in exile, they haven't born children, and now that's about to be reversed. In verses 1 through 3, it talks all about the dominion that Israel will have. Verse 2, enlarge the place of your tent, and let the curtains of your habitation be stretched out. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords, strengthen your stakes. So the picture here is of a family tent. It's a large Bedouin kind of tent in the desert, depicting the nation of Israel. God is saying, spread the sides out, make the stakes strong, because that is going to be overfilled. Lots of people are going to be coming into that. Verse 3 explains it. He says, for you will spread abroad to the right and to the left, and your offspring will possess the nations and will people the desolate cities. So again, we see what begins as a local restoration of Israel, quickly expanding to include all the nations of the earth. Verses 4 through 10 then, in this section that talks about the certainty of its restoration, talks about peace and safety. So the first three verses were about dominion, everyone being regathered, the nation being repeopled, and ultimately all the nations of the world coming under their dominion. Here we see peace and safety for God's people. Fear not, for you will not be ashamed in verse 4. Be not confounded, for you will not be disgraced, for you will forget the shame of your youth, and the reproach of your widowhood you shall remember no more. For your Maker is your husband, and the Lord of hosts is his name, and the Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. The God of the whole earth he is called. Again, expanding the vision here beyond Israel to the whole earth, and insisting that God is redeeming them, God is bringing them back. He's bringing them back in peace and security. It says, for the Lord has called you like a wife deserted and grieved in spirit, like a wife of youth when she is cast off. So God is drawing them back, bringing them back. And then in verses 7 through 10, we see God himself speak. For a brief moment I deserted you, but with great compassion I will gather you. In overflowing anger for a moment, I hid my face from you, but with everlasting love, I will have compassion on you, says the Lord, your Redeemer. So we see this permanent, unchangeable love that the Lord has for his people. It's called God's immutability. It's the theological phrase that describes this aspect of God, that he just does not change. It says here that he had a moment of desertion, an anger. He was in anger for a moment. He deserted them for a moment. And this was response to their sin. It's not that God changed. It's not that God didn't intend to draw them back. But because of their behavior, God's behavior toward them changed, but God's person himself, his person of compassion, did not change. His plans to restore Israel never changed. God is immutable. And because he's immutable, he will not destroy Israel. This is like the days of Noah to me, as I swore that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth. So I have sworn that I will not be angry with you, and I will not rebuke you. For the mountains may depart, and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion on you. So the Lord's compassion never changed. His intent to save never changed. His plans for the restoration of Israel and through Israel for the salvation of the world never changed. Israel's behavior, Israel's love toward him changed, and according to his eternal plan and purposes, he chastised them, he rebuked them, but always with the intention of showing them compassion. Verse 11, we get into the second part of the chapter, verses 11 through 17, and we see that the prosperity and security of Israel is certain. So first we saw that the redemption and renewal of Israel is certain in verses 1 through 10, and now 11 through 17, their prosperity and security. Look how he begins here. O afflicted one, storm-tossed and not comforted. So he's speaking to Israel here. Behold, I will set your stones in antimony and lay your foundations with sapphires. I will make your pinnacles of agate and your gates of carbuncles and all your walls of precious stones. So what is he talking about here but reestablishing the nation with splendor? Three different views on what these gems are, what they represent. One is that they represent people, that these are just merely symbolic of people, that he's going to draw the nation of Israel back into the land, establish them. They were storm-tossed, they were not comforted, but now they're going to be established and in splendor. So these stones would represent those people being reassembled. Others look at this and say, no, we're not talking about people here, but we're talking about the spiritual aspects of the people. We're talking about their being restored to this beautiful spiritual situation, spiritual state. It says in verse 13, all your children shall be taught by the Lord, and great shall be the peace of your children. So again, those who would take this as being symbolic of spiritual qualities, look at this reference to children and relate that to the references to stones, and then to these having the law taught by the Lord would be the spiritual qualities that they're going to have. This is anticipating Jeremiah 31:31 in the New Covenant, I think. A third view on these stones is that they are literal gems, but they have a spiritual meaning. They point to something beyond themselves, which seems to be a good interpretation here, I think. No reason to take them as anything but literal, but at the same time, in light of the context, it seems to be part of a general restoration and peace and security for God's people. It said, in righteousness you shall be established, and you shall be free far from oppression. You shall not fear, and from terror, for it shall not come near you. So again, the idea here is that God is going to establish them in peace and security. Part of that is going to be establishing the splendor of the nation, restoring the hearts of the people and the children, forgiving them and protecting them. Then he says, if anyone stirs up strife, it shall not be from me. Whoever stirs up strife with you shall fall because of you. So again, the Lord is guaranteeing here this enforced peace for the nation of Israel. So this is a great promise here. The suffering servant will bring salvation to Israel, a salvation that was begun to be understood, begun to be realized with their return from Babylonian captivity. But as the verses say, it's waiting ultimately for this worldwide aspect to be fulfilled, a worldwide dominion, a worldwide peace and security, something that we still hope for and something that we still look forward to. So our application today is to know that the Lord himself, according to Psalm 72, will bring justice and righteousness to the earth. He will establish his kingdom here on the earth, and he shall ensure peace and security until the time comes when he hands over his kingdom to the Father, and we enjoy the eternal state and the eternal peace and security that that's going to bring us. So God bless you, brothers and sisters. I know sometimes life is difficult. You're faced with challenges, individual challenges, national challenges, but the Lord is coming, and the Lord will turn everything right and vindicate his people and establish us all in health and security. God bless you.